Okay, so picture this. What if I told you that one of the most talked about market forecasts wasn't dreamed up by some AI on Wall Street, but by an Ohio farmer all the way back in 1875? Today we're digging into the Benner cycle, this wild century-old map that some people swear still predicts the booms and busts of our crazy modern economy.
And the guy who made it, Samuel Benner, he was not short on confidence. I mean, at the very bottom of his original hand-drawn chart, he just wrote two simple words: sure thing. Talk about calling your shot, right?
But you gotta ask the question, and it's really what this whole explainer is about. How could a guy, a farmer, whose own life was turned upside down by a market panic, have possibly figured out a pattern that would still be relevant 150 years later? Well, let's find out.
See, to really get the cycle, you first have to get the man and what drove him. In this whole story, it all starts with him losing absolutely everything. So this is Samuel Benner, and before he was some market guru, he was just a really successful farmer. But then the panic of 1873 hit, and it just wiped him out. Financially ruined. But instead of just packing it in, he got obsessed. He had to figure out why. Why did this happen? And what's so cool is how he tackled the problem. He wasn't some stuffy economist, he was a farmer. He knew deep in his bones that seasons control crops. The amount of crops you get, well, that controls supply. And supply and demand, that controls the price. So he asked this brilliant, simple question. What if the whole economy works the same way, just on a much, much bigger seasonal cycle? And that one simple question led him to create this whole forecast. It was all based on this repeating rhythm he was convinced he'd found. So what exactly did his prophecy say?
And this is it, the OG chart. He zeroed in on pig iron prices, which back then were kind of like a pulse for the whole industrial economy. Now, it looks a little chaotic, I know, but Benner boiled it all down into three really simple phases.
First up, you've got the panic years. These are those moments of just pure chaos, when everybody's either buying like crazy or selling in a panic, and prices just go completely haywire. Then there are the good times. These are the peaks, the years when prices are high. And Benner's advice here was super straightforward. This is when you sell. Get out while the getting's good. And finally, you have the hard times. These are the bottoms. The years when prices are low and everything feels pretty bleak. And his strategy was just as clear. This is when you buy. You buy your stocks, you buy your assets when they're on sale, and you just hold on tight until the good times come back around. It sounds so simple, right? It's an elegant theory. Buy low, sell high, and just keep an eye out for those panics. But the billion-dollar question is, after all this time, did any of it actually work? Okay, let's fast forward to a time we all remember. According to the Benner cycle, 2007 was marked as a year of high prices, a time to sell. Now think about that. Anyone who actually listened to that advice would have been sitting pretty when the whole global financial system started to unravel in 2008. Kinda spooky, right? But hey, one big spooky prediction could just be a fluke, a lucky guess. To know if there's really something to this, we have to look at the data over the long haul. And this is just fascinating. Researchers at Quantera Asset Management did just that. They crunched the S&P 500 numbers from 1925 all the way to 2023. And get this, in the years Benner called favorable, the market returned on average over 16%. In the unfavorable years, just over 7%. But here's the real kicker. Look at that standard deviation. That's a measure of volatility. In those unfavorable years, the market was way more unpredictable. The ride was almost twice as bumpy. And if you're a visual person, this chart just makes it crystal clear. That gap in average returns is huge. The data really does suggest that his favorable periods were, historically, a much better and safer time to be in the market. But, and I can't stress this enough, this is a huge but, it is not a perfect system. This is so important. Unfavorable does not automatically mean crash. Just look at the period from 2017 to 2023. The cycle called all those years unfavorable, and yet the market went up over 100%. So let's be clear, this thing is not a crystal ball.
So if it's not perfect, what is it? Well, this is where things get even weirder. Some modern analysts think Benner just accidentally stumbled onto a small piece of a much bigger, more complex puzzle.
So analysts like David McMinn have pointed out that Benner's patterns line up surprisingly well with this bigger framework called the 956-year grid. The easiest way to think of this grid is like a larger weather map for the economy. And what it suggests is that big financial panics don't just happen randomly. They tend to pop up in these predictable clusters. It's like Benner's simple farm-based cycle is just one little echo of this much deeper rhythm in the system.
Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all. What on earth is causing this? I mean, what's the engine driving these cycles? Benner himself had a theory. He actually thought it had to do with the planets, like Jupiter and Saturn, influencing things here on Earth. Now, there's no real evidence for the whole planet thing, but modern theorists have cooked up something called the moon-sun hypothesis. The basic idea is that the combined gravitational pull of the sun and the moon, the same forces that create ocean tides, might create these really subtle cyclical waves in human mood and behavior, which then show up in financial markets. It's a pretty wild idea, totally unproven, but it's really interesting to think about.
Okay, so after looking at the man, the data, and all these wild theories, how should we actually think about the Benner cycle today? Is it the sure thing he promised, or is it just a fun historical artifact? Honestly, the best way to look at it is this. It's not a crystal ball, it's a compass. A crystal ball is supposed to tell you the exact future, predict the exact day of a crash. The Benner cycle doesn't do that. A compass, on the other hand, it just points you in a general direction, and that's what this cycle seems to do. It's not for timing the market perfectly. It's for understanding the different seasons of risk. It's not an absolute sure thing, but man, is it a fascinating historical guide.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big, mind-bending thought. We live in this age of AI, of high-frequency trading, where we think we've got the market all figured out down to the microsecond. But what if the most important rhythms aren't found in a supercomputer? What if they're hidden in plain sight? In these simple, human-scale patterns that a farmer figured out with a pencil and paper almost 150 years ago?